I never thought the loudest sound I'd ever heard on my family's land would be the sound of a bridge collapse. But that's what occurred one moment. I was in the middle of my soybean field boots full of good Midwestern dirt, watching a parade of HOA officials in their neat shoes and press clothes. Next thing I knew, there was a deafening crack, a steel groan, and a whole damn bridge they built right on top of my crops. Just fell cars, concrete, and egos, all crashing down in a cloud of dust, incredulity, disbelief. I wish I could say I'm shocked, but months of fighting with the homeowners association, after all the letters, threats, meetings where they speak down at me like I was some kind of backward idiot. I'd learned to expect the worst, still observe that bridge so much, their pride disintegrating like an aluminum can. I'll admit, I nearly laughed. Close, you ever have one of those moments where you're like, your life is about to change, but you don't know if it for better or worse? That was me standing there with my arms locked and watching the HOA president, her hair sprayed so hard it could have withstood a tornado, yelling on her phone. Most likely trying to blame me for mess. I could tell the panic in her eyes, the way her lips curled when she glared at me like I was a weed in her pristine garden. If you've ever had to deal with an HOA, you know the type of rules for rules' sake power trips about colors in the mailbox and grass length. But this was something they'd built a bridge right through my land, without asking, without even so much as a valid apology. And now, with the entire town to witness their masterpiece, was nothing more than twisted wreckage and broken promises. I felt a strange mix of anger and satisfaction. My family's property had been trodden upon my voice, muzzled. But for the first time, it wasn't just me alone who could realize how wrong this was. The whole community was there, mouths open, eyes wide, at last catching a glimpse of the HOA for what they really were. And as the dust settled, I realized something. This wasn't finished, not by a long shot. If anything, it was just the beginning. And if you are reading this, then maybe you too have been steamrolled by somebody like them. Stay tuned, because what happened after that? Even I couldn't predict you. When I was a child, my granddad used to tell me, "This land remembers everything." I never really understood him until all of this happened. Each line of soybeans, each weathered fence post, every patch of wildflowers. There is a story, here is my family and mine. And now clearly the story of a bridge that never existed to be. I grew up on this farm, near the edge of a small Indiana town, where everyone knows your name. And when you sneeze in the diner at table, 3 people bless you before you even reach for a napkin. My parents broke this land before me, and their parents before them. We weren't wealthy, but we were tenacious. We knew the value of hard work, and we knew what it meant to fight for what's yours. My wife Sarah is the kind of woman who has the ability to calm a tempest with one look. She's why I rise every morning. Even when it appears as though the world is against me. We've 2 children, Emma, who's got more queries than detective, and little Ben, who thinks mud is a food group. This farm isn't crop and dirt, it's home. It's where we laugh, argue, celebrate, and mourn. It's where I learned Emma how to ride her bike. Where Ben learned how to catch fireflies, where Sarah and I dance barefoot beneath the stars after long days of work. But lately, it seemed as though someone's been trying to erase all of that. The HOA Homeowners Association, for those lucky enough not to know, started out as a group that was meant to preserve property values and keeps the community sounding fine. Sounds fine, right? But somewhere along the line, it had become a machine, rules upon rules. Okay for the smallest things, and if you have the temerity to challenge them, well, you better be ready for a fight. The president of the HOA, Mrs. Cartwright, is a force of nature, the kind that doesn't water her garden, but pulls it up by the roots. She arrived here a few years ago from the city, and since then it's been her mission to bring modernization to our little corner of the world. She's had a clipboard for every function and a glare that could curdle milk. I swear she practices her speeches in front of the mirror, just waiting for someone to go out of line. It wasn't this way. Always there was a time when neighbors loaned neighbors to fix fences, shared excess tomatoes, and babysat one another's kids. But now people keep heads down. They don't want to offend the HOA. I've seen good people get ticketed for having a flag that was too faded, or for planting sunflowers too close to the highway. It's like living under a microscope, and Mrs. Cartwright is the one holding the lens. I tried to stay out of it at first. I think if I kept my head down, worked on my land, and stayed to myself, they'd leave me alone. But then came the letters, the notice, the complaints. They informed me that my barn was an eyesore, that my tractor was in the wrong location, that my crops were occupying community space. I laughed at first, then I became angry. Then I realized they weren't going to leave me alone. Sarah instructed me not to let them get to me. They can't take what matters, she said, squeezing my hand. But I could see the worry in her eyes. The child started asking why people were whispering about us at the market. Why Mrs. Cartwright always looked at our house like it was something she'd scrape off her shoe. I started feeling like a stranger on my own land, like I was fighting a war I never signed up for. But every time I thought about throwing in the towel, I remembered my granddad saying, "This land remembers." And I was not going to let its next memory be one of defeat. So when the HOA stepped out and announced their grand plan, a bridge right through my fields, for the good of the community, I knew this was not just about concrete and steel. This was about power, about control, about somebody trying to write me out of my own story. And I'll be damned if I was going to allow that to happen. The first time I heard of the bridge was from a neighbor, not the HOA. That's always the way news travels faster than official letters in a town like ours. I was fixing a broken fence post when old Mr. Jenkins pulled up in his pickup window, rolled down a look on his face like he just swallowed a lemon. "You hear about the bridge?" he asked, voice low, glancing over his shoulder, like Mrs. Cartwright might pop out a cornfield. I shook my head, wiping sweat from my brow. "They're putting it right through your Northfield HOA says. It's for community access." He spat out the words as though they were bitter. I had laughed, thinking it was a joke, but then the letter official, HOA letter, had my name misspelled. But the message was clear: construction would start in 2 weeks. No argument, no vote, just a polite, "Thank you for your cooperation." At the end, as though I'd already agreed to it, Sarah read the letter 3 times. She shook her hands. "They can't do this, can they?" she whispered. "I want to tell her no, that there was some law, some rule, some basic decency that would protect us. But I didn't know I'd never had to fight for my own land before the next HOA meeting was packed. People crammed into the community center, the air thick with sweat and suspicion. Mrs. Cartwright stood at the front. Her smile tugged tight, her voice syrupy sweet, as she spoke of how the bridge would benefit us all. She never so much as looked at me. Not until I stood up, my family's farm. Isn't a shortcut? I told my voice louder than I'd meant. "You can't just build whatever you want on my land." The room was quiet. Mrs. Cartwright's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed just slightly. "We're just following what the rules state," she stated, her tone keen. "The people voted, and the majority decreed so." I looked around. No one said a word. I knew all these people I'd repaired roofs for, lent them tools, babysat their children. Now they glare at their feet, refusing to speak up that evening. I hardly slept whenever I closed my eyes. I visualized bulldozers flattening fields where Emma and Ben would go to play. I heard Sarah weeping in the kitchen. I tried not to make a noise so the kids would not awaken. I felt powerless, angry, and even lonelier than I ever have been my whole life yesterday. The construction company came, heavy vans, noisy engines, guys in hard hats who wouldn't even meet my eye. They put up orange fencing around the property. That wasn't theirs. I tried to talk to the foreman, but he shrugged and said, "We're just doing our job, sir. Take it up with the HOA." The worst part was not the noise or the devastation. It was the manner in which people started treating us at the grocery store. People whisper behind hands. Emma walked home from school in tears because her best friend's mom said we were troublemakers. Even the pastor at church avoided me. After church, I started wondering if maybe I was the problem. Maybe I should just let it go. Let them build their damn bridge and have at it. But whenever I saw my kids at Sarah on the land that my family had died for, I knew I wouldn't. That's when I realized that this wasn't about a bridge. It was about being bullied, about losing your voice, about watching everything you love get tromped by people who think they're smarter. And I wasn't by myself. I could see it on the faces of my neighbors, fear, anger, and something else too, a spark perhaps. Just perhaps I wasn't as alone as I was feeling, but the harm was done, the fields were devastated. My family was suffering, and the HOA didn't care. They'd made that clear enough. And as I stood there gazing on at the first cement pillars rising skyward, I promised I'd find a way to get some payback on them for what they were doing, no matter how much it was going to cost me. I spent the remainder of those days in a daze of anger and exhaustion. Every morning, I'd awake to the clatter of equipment destroying my ground, the blast horns of trucks in reverse, the shouts of workers who acted like I wasn't there. I tried to keep myself busy, fixing fences, visiting the animals. Anything to take my mind off the destruction just out of sight beyond the tree line. But it was impossible to ignore. Every time I looked out of the window, there was another piece of my family's history ripped up and thrown into the dumpster. Sarah tried to keep things normal for the kids, but I could see the tension in her eyes. Emma stopped asking to play outside. Ben started having nightmares. Even the dogs seemed tense, barking at every odd sound. Our home, once a source of laughter and warmth, seemed to be closing in on us one evening after the children were in bed. Sarah and I sat at the kitchen table, the letter from the HOA in front of us. "We can't let them get away with this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But what can we do? They have lawyers, money, the whole community behind them." I didn't have an answer. I felt small, powerless, like I was fighting a battle I'd already lost. But then something changed. Maybe it was a way Mrs. Cartwright swaggered around the building site, barking orders as if she owned the place. Or maybe it was a look on Emma's face when she asked if we'd be having to move. Whatever it was, I decided I wasn't going down without a fight. I started digging, not in the fields, but in the paperwork. I spent hours spent in the county records office, digging through ancient files, looking for whatever might be helpful to me. I studied every word of the HOA bylaws, every zoning regulation, every land title I could locate. It was tedious, laborious work. But I was desperate. That's when I found a clause, way down in the original land contract. Something about easement rights and community facilities. It was uncertain, but it gave me optimism. If I could prove that the HOA had gone over the line, perhaps I could stop them, or at least stall them. I wasn't by myself. For long word got around that I was fighting back. Soon, a few of the neighbors started coming to my door. There was Mr. Jenkins, who'd lost half his garden due to a beautification project. Mrs. Alvarez, who'd been fined for painting her porch. The wrong color blue. Even a new family down the street who hadn't even had their boxes out yet before getting a warning about their mailbox. We sat around my kitchen table, trading stories, frustrations, and most importantly, ideas. We knew that we weren't just fighting for ourselves. We were fighting for all those who had ever been steamrolled by the HOA's rules and threats. We started collecting evidence photos, letters, recordings of meetings. We met with a local lawyer, a feisty guy named Tom, who was raised in town and had a personal vendetta against the HOA himself. He said he would take our case pro bono. The farther we dug, the worse it got. Turns out the HOA had a habit of ramming through projects without proper votes, intimidating anyone who objected, even forging signatures on a couple of crucial documents. It was worse than we imagined, and the more we found out, the angrier we got. But anger wasn't going to cut it. "We needed a plan," Tom said. "Let's bring everything to the next HOA meeting, put it out in the open force, them to answer for what they done." It was a gamble. Mrs. Cartwright had had friends in high places, and we knew she wouldn't go down without a struggle. But we were tired of being intimidated in the days leading up to the meeting. The pressure mounted. I started getting anonymous threats on my mailbox, drop it. Or else Sarah got bizarre calls in the evenings, the line going dead as soon as she answered the phone. The kids came home from school with stories about teachers cautioning them about interfering with grown-up affairs. It was intimidation, simple and straightforward. But instead of scaring us off, it brought us closer together. Our small team grew bigger. Neighbors, more stories, more resolve. We started meeting in secret, sharing information, coordinating. We even made a group chat, sharing news and encouragement late at night. I will never forget the night before the meeting. We all gathered in my barn, the atmosphere heavy with nervousness and determination. Tom outlined our plan. Who would say what proof we carry, how we'd handle resistance. They're counting on us to fear, he said, looking at each of us directly. But we're collectively stronger. They can't silence all of us. I looked around the room at my neighbors, people I'd known my whole life, folks I'd barely spoken before. All this, we were various ages, varying upbringing. But we were united by one thing. We were tired of being bullied. And for the first time in a long while, I had hope. As I walked home, the house that night, I regarded the half-constructed bridge towered over my lands. It stood out of place, a blemish on the earth I loved. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew we had a fight to fight, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. But I also knew we weren't alone. If you ever felt powerless, if you've ever been pushed around by people who believe they are better than you know what I'm saying. Sometimes all it takes is one person stand up, and suddenly you realize you're not on your own tomorrow. We'd take on the HOA tomorrow. We'd make our argument, and for the first time, I believe we might actually succeed. The morning of a meeting, I barely slept, my head spinning with every imaginable outcome. What if they laughed us out of the room? What if Mrs. Cartwright twisted our words? What if the whole ordeal somehow made things worse? But when I looked at Sarah, at the manner in which she held my hand and smiled, I knew I couldn't back down. Not now, not after all we'd learned, and not with so many relying on me. I wore my nicest shirt, the one I usually save for church, and try to iron out wrinkles. Emma gave me a thumbs up. Ben handed me a penny with good luck on it. He'd found in the yard. "For good luck, Daddy," he said, his eyes wide and hopeful. I tucked it into my pocket, feeling its weight. And all that had brought us to this place, the community center, was already bustling when we arrived. I could smell the tension in the air, thick as summer sun. Neighbors congregate in clumps, small clusters, whispering, glancing anxiously at the front of the room, where Mrs. Cartwright stood, clipboard in hand, lips pursed as if she had bitten into a lemon. She caught my eye and gave me a smile, which was all teeth and no heart. Tom, our lawyer, opened the door to us. He was exhausted but firm. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded, though my stomach was doing acrobatics. Our little group gathered in the back, holding folders full of evidence pictures, letters, copies of forged signatures. We'd rehearse what to say, who would say how to stay calm, no matter what the meeting started, like the rest of them. Mrs. Cartwright lecturing on community values and common decency. But when she got to the agenda item about the bridge, Tom stood up. "Excuse me, Mrs. Cartwright, but we have certain issues we'd like to raise." The room grew quiet. Everyone glanced at us individually. We made our case. Tom covered the legality of it, the violations of easement rights, the unconstitutional voting. Mrs. Alvarez showed the fine she'd gotten for ridiculous violations. Mr. Jenkins read a letter he'd authored on losing his garden. I discussed my family's history on the land, in terms of the impact the bridge had already made on our lives. I could feel my voice shaking, but I didn't relent. I looked directly at Mrs. Cartwright, daring her to interrupt. She tried, of course she rolled her eyes, scoffed, tried to talk over us. These were unsubstantiated claims. She cried, her voice icily cold. "We're simply playing by rule." But Tom was ready. He produced the photocopies of the forged papers, the evidence of rigged votes, the tape recordings of sessions when the decisions had been made. Behind closed doors, the room erupted into gasps and mutters. For the first time, I noticed a flicker of terror in Mrs. Cartwright's eyes. She tried to reclaim control, but the situation changed. People spoke up, neighbors who'd been silent for years, finally having their voices heard. "You fined me for my mailbox. You threatened to tow my car. You never asked us what we wanted." The room was electric with anger, frustration, and most of all, solidarity. But we knew Mrs. Cartwright wouldn't go down without a fight. She called for a recess huddle with her inner circle, tried to threaten Tom with lawsuits. But we stood strong. We had the truth on our side. And ultimately, the community was behind us that night. After the meeting, I lay awake. My phone blew up with calls from neighbors, thank yous, apologies, stories of their own encounters with the HOA. I felt this strange mix of hope and exhaustion. We hadn't succeeded yet, but we'd made our presence felt. We'd shown them that we weren't afraid. The next day, pressure built. Mrs. Cartwright issued a letter blaming us for libel and undermining community harmony. She threatened additional fines, additional legal recourse. But in the place of going back, the more people are part of our cause, we started a petition, held a town hall, contacted local news. The story picked up first through word of mouth, then on social media, then in a local newspaper. Suddenly, it wasn't just our fight anymore, it was everyone's. I spent hours on the phone, answering questions, sharing our message. Sarah baked cookies for the volunteers, who arrived to help Emma. Made protest signs. Ben drew a picture of our farm with a big red X marked over the bridge. It wasn't much, but it meant everything. We knew we needed a last move, something that would make the HOA back down for good. Tom suggested we file an injunction to stop the construction. On the basis of evidence we had gathered, it was risky if we lost. We could be ordered to pay legal fees, but if we won, the bridge would be shut down, and the HOA would have an answer for all they'd done. The evening before, the court hearing, I went out to the edge of the field, the half-finished bridge over my head. I thought of my granddad, about all the things he'd taught me about holding up for what is right. I thought of my family, my neighbors, everybody who put their trust in me. I was afraid for sure, but I was also prepared. If you've ever been pushed to your point of breaking, you know what I'm saying. There comes a time when fear turns into determination. Once you realize you've got nothing left to lose. That was where I was, and I knew whatever happened. After that, I wasn't going to regret standing up the next morning we went to court. The room was packed with neighbors, journalists, even some nosy city officials. Mrs. Cartwright's at the front, having her lawyers watch over her left and right looking, such as if she swallowed a bug. Tom presented our case calmly, clearly. The judge listened, asked questions, made notes when my time to testify. I spoke the truth about the land, the bridge, the bullying. The hope change would be possible when the judge finally spoke in the room. The entire room stood still on the evidence in front of us. I am issuing a temporary injunction against further construction of the bridge until they have a full investigation into the actions of the HOA. The room burst out with cheers. Mrs. Cartwright's face went white. I could feel Sarah's hand wrapped around mine, tightening. We'd done it. We'd stopped them, at least temporarily. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like maybe we could actually win this thing. Once and for all. The days after the hearing at court were like a dream I dared not wake from. For the first time in months, the building site remained the no longer ear-splitting engines at dawn, no longer intruders tramping about on my land. The bridge remained there half-finished and gangly, a monument to everything the HOA had tried to make us do. Each time I saw it, I felt a strange mix of pride and anger. We'd stopped them, at least for now. But I knew Mrs. Cartwright wasn't done. She was like a wasp you sweat. But don't kill angrier, more desperate, and twice as dangerous. She started showing up at community events, smiling for the cameras, spinning the yarn as if she was some victim. Certain people, she'd say, are sabotaging the harmony of our neighborhood. She never mentioned my name, but everybody knew who she was talking about. The pressure didn't abate. Anonymous letters continued to appear in my mailbox. The HOA issued newsletters, replete with half-truths and backhanded threats. Some neighbors, the so-called polite ones, who'd always played it safe, started to avoid me at the store. But for every person who avoided, two others stepped in with support, sharing their own stories, inquiring how they could help Tom. Our lawyer kept on digging. The investigation into the behavior of the HOA was moving forward, and the more we found out, the worse it was. There were emails, transcripts of meetings, even a few whistleblowers from within the HOA who'd had enough of Mrs. Cartwright's tricks. The evidence piled up, and so did the public outrage. The local paper picked it up, then the regional paper, and suddenly our small town was on television. Our struggle splashed across headlines. Reporters showed up on the farm asking for interviews. I never thought I'd see my own face on the evening news, speaking about land rights and community justice. It was like a dream, but it felt right. People needed to know what was happening. Not just here, but in towns like ours. All across the country, the next HOA meeting was standing room only. The air was electric, buzzing with excitement and nerves. Mrs. Cartwright tried to keep things as normal as possible, but the crowd wasn't having it. People shouted questions, demanded answers. Tom stood up and laid out the evidence: fraud, intimidation, abuse of power. He didn't hold back. Then it was my turn. I stood before my neighbors, my friends, even a few people who'd never give me the time. A day before all this, my hands trembled, but my voice remained firm. I told them what this fight had cost my family, what it had cost us all: the fear, the anger, the hope that things could change if we stood together. And then something wonderful happened one by one. People began standing up. Mrs. Alvarez, Mr. Jenkins, the new couple down the street. Even people who've been too scared to speak out before found their voices. They told their stories, their frustrations, their dreams for a better community. The room was alive with energy, with solidarity, with a kind of hope I hadn't felt in years. Mrs. Cartwright tried to regain control, but it was too late. The board members, sensing the shift, started distancing themselves. One even resigned on the spot. Apologizing to the whole room, the crowd erupted in applause. For the first time, Mrs. Cartwright appeared small, her power waning with each saying. The coup de grace was delivered when the county commissioner, who'd been quietly sitting in the back, stood up on the basis of the evidence and the resolve of this community. I am requesting a full audit of the HOA and a suspension of an authority. Until further notice, the room erupted. People hugged, cheered, even cried. I felt Sarah's arms around me, Emma and Ben holding on to my sides. We'd done it. We'd really done it. As the meeting closed, people streamed out into the parking lot, chatting, laughing, making plans of the future. The bridge, once a symbol of everything we'd lost, now stood as a reminder of what we could do. If we stood together, Mrs. Cartwright slid out the side door, her clipboard left behind her. Rain finally lifted that evening as I sat on the porch with my family. As the sun set over our battered but whole fields, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace we'd fought back. We'd won, and we'd done it as a group. If you've ever wondered whether a single voice could make a difference, let me tell you it can. But think about when an entire community finds its voice. That's when change truly occurs. The days that followed felt better, like a storm had finally blown over and cleared the air. For the first time in months, I could walk my world unobserved. Without that knot of fear in my stomach, the construction workers broke down and left their trucks roaring down the highway, leaving a half-finished bridge as a strange monument to everything we'd been through. Neighbors who used to keep their distance now absent from their porches, some even stopping by to say thank you or have a cup of coffee. The sense of community we used to have, the one I believed we'd lost, began to return again. People discussed planting a community garden where the bridge would have been, or maybe installing a playground for the kids. It felt like we were actually taking care of our own future once more. Sarah smiled. More Emma and Ben tore wild to the fields, their laughter carrying across the land. Even the dog looked happier, running around after them with his tail wagging like he won the lottery. Our house felt home again, safe, warm, and ours. The HOA, stripped of its power, was forced to justify everything it had done. The audit revealed years of questionable business, and Mrs. Cartwright was removed from her position. New leadership was brought in: community people who actually listened to you. Rules were rewritten this time with everyone's input. No more secret meetings, no more threats, no more fear. I got a letter from the county, officially reinstating our land rights and offering compensation for the damage. It wasn't about the money, though. It was about respect, about finally being heard, about being aware that if you stand up for what's right, you have the power to make a change, not just for yourself, but for all the people around you. In retrospect, I figured out this war wasn't solely about a bridge. It was about justice, about standing up against bullies, about having faith in the possibility of change. We'd stand up for something greater than us, and come out even stronger on the other side. If you ever find yourself somewhere that you feel like the odds are against you, remember this: you're not alone. And sometimes the quietest voices can start the biggest revolutions. Months have passed since that day, but the revolutions still resonate throughout our town. The old bridge structure is gone now, replaced by wildflowers and laughter. Not concrete and control. Sometimes I find myself standing at the end of the field, just watching the kids play where the bulldozers once were, and I just can't help but smile. Neighbors are working together again. We are sharing tools, stories, and dreaming for what is to come. The new HOA, made up of real people, with real hearts, actually listens. Our community feels alive, hopeful, and stronger than ever. Every so often someone asks, if I regret standing up and fighting back, not for a second. If anything, I wish I'd done it sooner. Because now when I look at my family, my land, and my neighbors, I see more than just survival. I see a future we built together. If you're watching this, wondering if you should speak up, let me be the one to tell you. You can, and when you do, you might just inspire a whole town to stand with you.